Okay, so we've all got our patterns to the point where our major lines are drawn, and you've put on the letter corresponding onto each of your pattern pieces, and you have labeled it as background or tree or trunk. And that becomes very important, maybe not to you as you're looking at the paper, it makes sense. But when we go to complete, when we're actually into the sewing portion, these fabrics are going to be jumbled up, and you're sometimes going to have a green tree, you're sometimes going to have a red tree, and you're sometimes going to have a green tree. And that goes with everything. Sometimes the backgrounds will be red, or it'll be green, or it'll be cream. And the trunks change color throughout the pattern. So it's important that you label your pieces so that you are in tune with what color that you're working with. Am I doing a green tree right now? And I would suggest that you kind of work in that form. I'm very organized when I work, so that hopefully I don't make a mistake. Do I make mistakes? You bet. But the more organized you are about your approach, the better you are in the long run. So that's why I wanted you to mark whether it was background, tree, or trunk, because it is going to be important when you go to do your sewing. All right, the next step for this, for marking your pattern, is to give yourself some registration marks on all of your adjoining pieces. Because when you put these angles together, things are going to go wonky. Like you're just going to not understand what the heck is going on, because the sides of these pieces are not going to line up at all. You're going to have, in some cases, you're going to have a 1/4 inch point off of two ends. In other cases, you're only going to have a 1/4 inch point off of one end. So we want to make this as positive a seaming process as we can. And you'll notice in my prototype, and I tried as best as I could, and we still have some minor issues. Do not, when we start sewing, do not trim these blocks until you have made all of them, because we need to know what size based on the general average of your finished block, unfinished blocks, sorry. So what I want you to do now, first of all, is to take a ruler, and again, this is me being extremely precise in what I do, and I mean, you go ahead and do it another way if you want, but oh, sorry, a word about pencils. Mechanical pencils, excellent. The cheapest you can buy. It doesn't matter.
Walmart.
Okay, yeah, Walmart, all those big mechanical pencils, as opposed to the old HP lead pencils with the really thick lead, because that throws you off. Okay, you've created almost a 1/16 of an inch mark there, whereas with mechanical pencils, or I mean, of course, the quilting industry sells special pencils just for us, but they are
$17 a pop.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, go ahead and buy them if you want, absolutely. But mechanical pencils do the same thing, okay? And they're very inexpensive. So I want you to line up a registration mark, and I just use my little 1x6 to do this process. Everybody okay? So I line up a registration line along my pattern piece, along my seam line here. And I'm just going to do a big, whoops, come on now. I'm just going to do a big mark across there. And I actually did on my pattern, I did it with ink, just so that it stands out, okay? It's not a problem, doesn't do anything to your fabrics, or won't mark anything up. But anyway, you need a registration line across there so that when we go to piece these pieces together, we know where they should join.
So it doesn't have to be halfway or anything. Just has to be that.
Just has to be a good mark
It has to cross the line,
Yes.
half an inch on
I
each
get
side.
it, so that they meet.
Now the other thing, I'm just fixing the other thing I did, as you can see on my finished mark, was I made registration marks where there was possibly going to be a seam. I'm going to cross a seam. And I just delineated that as an arrow rather than just a line through it. So you know that that's the difference. This is a seam I should be able to find. There's no seam there. I just want to make sure that I get my pattern lined up in the right position. Okay, so those are 2 of the markings that you're going to do. And, you know, here's another seam line. And again, I'm going to line it up on the seam line, but I'm going to note that that is a seam, not just a cross place. So when I'm piecing these 2 pieces, this and this grouping together, however it goes, I know that somewhere close to that mark should be a seam. Okay, I'm just giving myself all the help I can in order that these pieces come together.
But when you cut that, you won't see this here.
You will have, okay, I'll show you on cut pieces. So I want you to do those markings throughout your quilt. And you can see that it's, you know, I've done markings all over this pattern. This piece has 2 seam lines, so why not just do the 2 seam lines? I don't have to do any other mark. Understand?
So it's just the more you do, the better, or?
No, you don't necessarily, like here I would do 1 mark. That's it, 1 mark. Okay, somewhere down that trunk line. No, you don't have to go crazy with this, but put that.
It's a 1/2 inch that you're doing.
Approximately.
Oh, yeah, I guess it is.
1/4 and 1/4.
Oh, sure. Good to be precise, Anna. That's really good. Okay.
I still don't understand it, but once I get it together.
Yeah, and once you start working
in a
with
minute,
it, you
yeah.
will. I'm just going to finish this line here.
You can copy from that.
Okay, now the other thing I want you to do is designate your grain, on grain pieces. I want the edge of your project to be as on grain as possible. So we're going to get.
What on green is.
Okay, could I have a piece of fabric? Yes. Thanks. All right. So an on grain, you have 2 grains in your fabric. You have the warp and the weft. This is the selvage of my fabric. So that is a grain going across in this direction. The threads are moving that back and forth that way. The other grain is which is perpendicular to that selvage threading. Okay, so the other thread that makes up fabric is going perpendicular in this direction. Okay, so you've got a grain here and you've got a grain here. The strongest grain is with the selvage. That's the strongest grain. There is absolutely no stretch to that grain. This is a weaker grain, but it's still pretty good. Okay, and that's the one that we use the most.
Because you'd waste too much doing it the other way. Cutting it that way, you get more out of it.
Well, cutting it along the selvage, when you're working with if you've got 3 meters of fabric that you're using for a quilt, cutting 3 meter lengths of your strip size is not too practical. So we generally, in quilting, when we're cutting our strips, we cut on the cross grain.
Salvage to salvage.
We cut salvage to salvage, exactly. So we would cut up this length. That's when we're using major yardage. And we're going to prepare our fabrics later because I do want you to be working on a straight grain. And so all of our fat quarters must be put on grain. That's the Val rule.
Did it?
Somebody else might allow you to just go ahead and use your fat quarters the way they are. I'm looking for best result, and most of my pattern, most of my edges are very close to grain. Is there some movement? Yeah, there is, because I'm not perfect. But it's a pretty solid piece here that isn't going to play too much when I work with it, okay? All right, so we are going to mark all of our straight grain edges, which is all around the edge of our project. Okay, so the way that you do that in dressmaking is we draw a straight line in conjunction with that edge, and we put arrows. That's an on grain line. Okay? And I would do it on this one as well. Whoop. On grain.
Oh, I get it for dressmaking. I know how to do dresses with that, yeah.
That is the way that,
Yeah.
the straighter grain when you're doing a dress pattern. So why not? So you need to do this all around the edge pieces. So every one of these pieces will have a straight of grain marking on it. Okay, so you have 3 patterns to go and put all your markings on.
Okay.
Sit at your table, be relaxed.